one of the things that controls whether a fire ignites or not is whether the plants are dry enough to burn. And so in a dry year like this one, the fire season begins earlier, and the plants are more likely to burn.
Our rain has been very low this year. We're something like 60% of what the rainfall normally would be, the average rainfall. And if you look at how that's affected the soil moisture, we're about 2 months ahead of schedule where we normally would be in terms of soil moisture. And soil moisture is what keeps plants green, helps them bring out new foliage, all those different things. And so when the soil moisture gets below a certain level, we start getting higher fire danger. And as I said, we're about 2 months ahead of schedule. The thing of most concern would be the live fuel moisture. So the kinds of work we would look at would be saying something about what kind of fuel types are present, but then we'd also get a measure of where we are in terms of live fuel moisture, and it's actually fairly low right now. So if a fire does start, it has the possibility of burning fairly quickly and far.
The human communities are at risk. Their structures at risk, their lives at risk. So there's always a health and safety aspect to wildfires. Are the plants and animals at risk? In general, they can recover from these fires. They have a lot of adaptations that allow them to reseed into burned areas, to resprout in burned areas. The animals will move back in and recolonize the burned areas. There's some evidence from the western U.S. that the trends in climate, which is warmer temperatures, perhaps more extreme fluctuations in precipitation, has led to increased fire risk. And that's best documented in the Rocky Mountains. It's not as clear from Southern California that that's happening, partly because our climate hasn't changed as dramatically in the last 20 or 30 years, and partly because the effect of humans in these landscapes is so strong, and the human activities have also changed so dramatically in the last 20 or 30 years. So fires are increasing in Southern California. Is it due to climate? Really, I don't think there's conclusive evidence that that's the case.
But the kinds of systems we're in, which is Mediterranean shrubland ecosystems, weather is the dominant control on what burns. So it isn't necessarily as cyclical as you might think in terms of the actual fires. So you think about locally, we had the Zaka fire in 2007, we had the Gap fire in 2008, we had the Tooth Tea fire in 2008, we had the Jesucita fire in 2009, and although they didn't all burn the same areas, any one of those areas could have burned a second time because there was still fuel present. And a lot of those were tied into the weather. We did not have fires in 2010 and 11 because they were actually pretty good years in terms of moisture conditions. 2011 in particular was very wet, and it was very foggy, which kept the moisture levels high. 2012 was kind of in the middle, and then of course 2013 is looking worse than every other year previously. So it's worse than 2008 and worse than 2009, which were bad fire years. So weather appears to be a major control.
Anytime you burn off the vegetation cover from the mountain slopes that we have back here, it affects the amount of silt that gets washed into the reservoirs. And so our drinking water supply depends on these reservoirs where you can store the water, and if you wash a lot of sediment into those reservoirs after fires, it just reduces the storage capacity of those reservoirs. So that's always an issue for us.
There's areas such as the Santa Monica Mountains that have burned over 8 times since 1930 in some portions of the range. And so there what you get is what's called type conversion. So you convert over from the original vegetation, which might have been this greenbark ceanothus, over to something else, typically shrublands, grasslands, or for example, sometimes drought deciduous shrublands encroach into these areas. And so I think that's one of the big concerns people have in terms of environmental effects is by changing the fire regime. And a lot of these are anthropogenic fires. They're started by humans, or they're started by winds knocking down power lines, mistaken fires, arson. We're changing the fire regime. And by changing the fire regime, we're actually changing the ecology and changing the vegetation around us.